All right, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, Nima and team, for inviting us. We're going to start with quick introductions from everyone on the panel, and then we'll dive right into my favorite topic. From an investor perspective, it's really the difference between success and failure, whether a company exits or not. So we have lots of things to cover. Do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah, so I'm Clarence Wooten. Now I call myself a serial founder.
Hello, sir.
Hey. Part-time angel investor.
Panel before you just went on, so we're on schedule.
I think he's still mic'd up.
Houston, we have a problem.
Way back when I founded a company called imagecafe.com that was acquired 11 months after we launched by Network Solutions. Since then, I founded a couple other startups. I claim 4. Nima just mentioned them: groupsite.com, Progressly, and venturefund.io. I'm now based in Palo Alto, and a big part of the startup ecosystem here.
Awesome. So I'm SC Moati. I spent 12 years building products and companies. Now I'm spending most of my time investing. I also run a community for product folks and entrepreneurs called Products That Count, and we have a bunch of community events that you might want to check out.
Hi, I'm Ajay. I'm a partner at Pear VC. We have a typo, not Pearl. Pear. We're a pre-seed and seed stage venture capital firm based here in Palo Alto. I've been doing that for about 2 years, but for the 5 years prior to that, I was a founder of a company called Wedding Party. Wedding Party was a consumer product in the wedding space. Ran that, got a ton of traction, and we ended up selling the company to Instacart, and then I joined the original people who invested in our company.
What's up, everyone? I'm Jojo Hedaya. I am the founder and CEO of Unroll.Me. We started it in late 2011 and then got acquired by Slice Technologies in 2014. We're based out of New York, and there are about 14 of us on the team, and we are still working for Slice, and we're very happy.
So Jojo, I'll start with you. I'd love to hear your exit journey and starting with why you started your company, and then fast forward to how you exited, and then I'll have the same question for you, Clarence, and you, AJ. Just pick one company and tell us the story.
So
your company.
So for me, when we started this company, I was a senior in college, and I was actually studying to be a lawyer. I was studying for the LSAT, but myself and a few founders got together, and we were amazed by the technology space that you can build this one site and millions of people can see it. So we just got together, started a few companies on the side, and one of them was Unroll.Me. And we were, we liked the idea of email management and felt like our email inboxes were always overflowed. So we went and started, the simple idea of, here are all your newsletters, let me unsubscribe from them in one shot. And then turned it into the Daily Digest, where you could combine them all into one. And over the time, we had a lot of trouble raising money. Everyone said it was a tool, it wasn't a product. You're not gonna grow past 100,000 users. And we started skyrocketing on the user base. And I think at the time we were about like 1.4 million users, and we had to make a decision. Do we go and try to raise a round, or do we try to partner or get acquired? And that's when like the data in email started to become super valuable. And we were consumer guys, right? All we knew was consumer. We were young, right? I'm 27 now, so I don't even know how old I was at that time. I think it was 24. And there were a few companies coming after us that wanted to take our user base and create an intelligence business out of it. So we actually had a pretty crazy story where we signed a letter of intent with a different company and spent 3 months in the M&A process. And it didn't work out for various reasons, and I think there are some good lessons there. So like one is they wanted to replace the team. They wanted us to just rip apart the team. They didn't value what we built. They thought we were all very junior and inexperienced, and they wanted just to put their stamp on our product, and we didn't like that. But the main thing was that we didn't see eye to eye on what to do with the current team members in terms of taking care of them. I remember everyone was underpaid at Unroll.Me. I think like engineers were making like $70,000, and they said they would take care of them. They told me that from day one. And then 3 months after, they said to me, as I was going on my honeymoon, this is the increase for each one of the employees. And it was like 70,000 to 75,000. And they sent out that email to each one of the team members. So like right then and there, I called my co-founder Josh. I'm like, we're not doing this. And we saw a week later that Slice got acquired by Rakuten. We called them up to congratulate them, and they're like, "You guys still for sale?" And we're like, I don't know. Like, give me a number and give us the weekend to decide. So we gave them a number that we thought was too high. And in that number, I also gave salary amounts for each one of our employees, which was like almost 100% increase. And they came back and said yes to both. And you know, I think the best thing that has been in our relationship of getting acquired is they're like, you guys do your thing. You know, and you're talking about like Harpy and Scott, some of the founders of Slice have sold multiple companies. They're like partners in Eric Schmidt's, VC fund innovation endeavors, and they're like, we're not going to tell you what to do. You do your own thing. You know what you're doing. You built this up. We're here to support you. You keep your team in place. You keep your culture. You focus on the consumers, and we'll focus on the business side of things. And I've honestly learned more post-acquisition than pre-acquisition. Where every team member is still there. We're still a very small team based out of New York, and now we have over 4 million users. So it's awesome.
Jojo, you said you learned more after the acquisition than before. So if you were going to turn the clock backward and replay that movie, like what would you do differently, or what would you do the same? What are the lessons you've learned?
So I think startup world is like a roller coaster ride, right? There are like ups and downs throughout the entire process. So I think every single piece in what we were doing was a learning experience. So I don't know if I would change anything per se. Like I think I would still do things the same way. I would just say is like, starting a company and getting it off the ground and getting 100,000 users is one thing. Scaling it to 4 million, like I thought you can always throw money at the problem if you have, I didn't know what scaling was, right? It's like you can't just like spin up Amazon instances and your product is gonna work, right? You need to like figure out how to partition your database and stuff like that. Maybe now looking back at it, would I've taken the chance ourselves, raise a big round and go after that business on our own? I think this worked out for us. I got an amazing mentor in Harpy who has taught me the ins and outs of business, the ins and outs of like, how you even raise money, how you grow a team, how much you care about your team members and growing them. And for me, the team is everything. And if you look back, right, it's like, again, I had no idea what the hell I was doing when I started this. Like, honestly, no idea. Our head of engineering at Unroll Me was an intern. Our head of product at Unroll Me was an intern. So I think just seeing the success of every member of the team, like I wouldn't have changed anything. Now it's just about what's next.
Clarence, you've started and sold many companies. Do you want to maybe share some compare and contrasting stories?
Yeah, I think, the startup I'll talk about is called imagecafe.com. It was actually acquired in 1999, which seems like a lifetime ago now. So it's certainly going to contrast these stories up here. But back then, I was a young entrepreneur. I wasn't even based in Silicon Valley. I was based in Maryland. And I read this book called Burn Rate, and it talked about a law firm in Silicon Valley called Wilson Sonsini. And it talked about them being the most powerful law firm in tech. So I went on Alta Vista, pre-Google, and found Wilson Sonsini's website. And I figured if I could get Wilson Sonsini to represent my company, they can introduce me to VCs because they represented most of the VCs. And I started in their attorney directory. I started in the A's, and I sent the same canned email to 4 attorneys there. It basically said that I'm the CEO of an East Coast-based e-commerce internet startup, and I'm looking for Silicon Valley-based legal representation and venture funding. Give me a call. Now, Image Cafe, just to fill you guys in, we were the world's first superstore of prefabricated website templates for small businesses. So we were very similar to what Wix and Squarespace is today, but we had a SaaS model attached to our business. So I think we were one of the first SMB SaaS companies on the internet. So anyway, to make a long story short, the guy calls me back from Wilson Sonsini, and his name is Mike Arrington. And so this is the summer of 1998. So Mike and I became friends. He was a young associate at Wilson. He worked under a partner, a guy named Jim Strawbridge. Jim had taken Netscape public, actually, a couple of years prior, which really started the whole dot-com boom. And Jim, coincidentally, also happened to be from Maryland. So they decided to bring us on as a client, and we had no money. my co-founder and I. And so we negotiated a deal, which is common today, where they would basically set up the company, stock option plan, everything we needed. And if we were not successful at raising, a venture round, we wouldn't have to pay. And that ended up working out. I was a student of the internet. I had watched a number of startups out here, such as Yahoo, et cetera, go from 2 Stanford students to multi-millions of dollars in investment from Sequoia. So, it was my mission to put together the perfect round. So I would fly out here, crash on Mike's couch, go pitch VCs, and they were all pretty much saying the same thing. They were pretty much telling me that I needed to be in the Valley. Coincidentally, on one of my flights out here, I got an ex-girlfriend who was a flight attendant to bump me up to first class because I was hoping I might sit next to an angel investor on the flight. And unbelievably, I did. I ended up sitting next to a guy, his name is Bill Daniels. He was principal at Bank Boston Robertson Stevenson at the time, and he was a captive audience. I ended up sort of spieling my whole vision for Image Cafe on that flight, and unbeknownst to me, he was an angel investor, and he set up several meetings for me. He wanted me to meet his friends and just share the idea with them.
Tell us your exit story.
All right, okay, yeah, this could take all day. But the exit story was, we were in the middle of putting together a $3 million Series A right after we had launched. We had raised a couple $100K before then. Draper, a firm in New York called Argentum, and Network Solutions was going to be our strategic investor. And that's what got them all to the table. I realized I needed Network Solutions as a partner because they had a monopoly on domain names. What ended up happening was Network Solutions kind of preempted the round and offered to acquire us. Initially, I said no, and then we started to run out of cash much quicker than I thought, and I hadn't gotten around close yet. So I went back and said yes, and thank goodness I did. So we ended up closing around in November of '99. That was about 11 months after we had launched, and we all know what happened in mid-2000, the bubble burst. So I spent 3 years inside of Network Solutions doing an earn-out. My experience wasn't as pleasant as yours. It was more like a 3-year punishment. But at the end of the day, it all worked out, and that was my first exit.
So I'm hearing a pattern of, passionate team, a bunch of luck, a lot of hard work, and then an early exit, which matches, the story of my own company. You're an investor. Is that a pattern that you see with your portfolio?
I think it happens when we invest in a company. We invest super early, so it can be 2 or 3 people in an idea. Small checks, anything from a couple $100,000 to $2 million. But when we invest, at least at our firm, we're really looking for a long-term relationship. We're not thinking about. I don't. In the 2 years that I've been there, I don't think we've ever asked, who buys this company. What we think about is how passionate, how knowledgeable are the teams? Is the team in the market that they're going after? Are they sufficiently well positioned? Do they really understand their space? And how big is the overall opportunity? And that's really what we think about most.
Interesting. We invest a little bit later. We ask a lot about exits, and we look for the pattern that you described and you described, Jojo, which is a relatively fast to exit. If you were going to think back and look at best practices of ways to attract potential buyers besides getting an upgrade on a plane, what are some recommendations or things you guys would share with the audience?
Well, really quickly, I think successful serial entrepreneurs do a couple of things kind of instinctively, which help them effectuate an exit. Ultimately, when you're building a business, you know who the large industry incumbents are who could potentially acquire you. I no longer believe you should build a company with the purpose of being acquired, because that usually means you're probably not a venture-funded company. But at the same token, while you're building your company, you should know who the players are. You should know who runs product inside of large companies that could be great strategic partners for you, who's on their board potentially, and try and get them on your company's advisory board, because oftentimes acquisitions come through partnerships, because partnership with a smaller startup and a larger company gives them a window of opportunity to sort of see exactly who you guys are and how you fit like a puzzle piece into their overall strategy. So most acquisitions aren't accidental, And instead of trying to sell your company, you want to be acquired. It's just like having a house and somebody knocking on your door saying, move out, right? Here's a check. You get a much bigger price than you would if you put a for sale sign in a yard.
How do you initiate a partnership? Like, are you talking to a corporate venture group, a product team?
I think you have to be naive. One of the great things about being an entrepreneur is that when you're naive and you haven't sort of spent a lot of time in corporations and you haven't gotten used to sort of hierarchy and rules, you become a CEO, you believe that you can call any other CEO. At least I did. I thought the minute I became a CEO, I could call Bill Gates. Hey, we're both CEOs, right? So that naivete will help you if you're hungry and passionate, find the individual you need to meet with and go directly towards them. So keep that, it's a blessing.
I'll add something. So, when I think about selling your company, the first thing that I think about is just having a good company. And that comes down to fundamentals. So I was running my startup for 5 years. Why 5 years? Because for the first 2 years, we sucked. And we were just a bad company. We didn't have the right team. We didn't have the right product. We had no idea how to build and iterate quickly. We didn't have product market fit. But then once we started figuring it out and once we started hiring the right people and figuring out our market, we started building the fundamentals to have a good company. And we started growing very quickly. And then when we did start having these partnership conversations, those turned into acquisition conversations, because when the partnership teams met our team, they were like, these guys are pretty smart. They have built something that's pretty interesting. And so I just don't think there's a shortcut to that.
So after you call Bill Gates or someone and they say, let's do a partnership together, what are your recommendations or advice for turning that partnership conversation into an acquisition conversation?
Okay.
Or how does that happen?
Yeah, so two things. First thing is, if you do call Bill Gates or whoever, I learned this the hard way. I was really naive. I thought that they would come propose a partnership to me. It's actually the other way around. Like, always go prepared with an idea of how you can work together. So I got that wrong the first couple of times. And then I think you're just really establishing a relationship, right? You have to get to know each other. Ideally, you can work together a little bit in the partnership. And the way that it turns into an acquisition opportunity is because they know you and they're aware of the timeline of your company, right? So I heard you guys were fundraising. And you were talking to other companies when you were doing when your acquisition actually went through. And the same thing happened for me, where we were talking to a bunch of people, we were raising money, and the people that we were close with, the people that we had partnered with, were kind of aware of it, and then they came to us with the acquisition opportunities.
So in other words, you're saying use your, to transform a partnership discussion into an acquisition discussion, fundraising conversations are a great way to sort of trigger a change, which is sort of what happened to you as well.
And what's also interesting with us is, we started our relationship with Slice, as trying to have a partnership with them. It didn't end up working out, but we already had a relationship with Harpy, with Scott, with Eric, with the founders of Slice, because they identified us as the biggest email panel early on, right? So as we were talking to them and as we got to, we got to know them through I would say 6-7 months before getting acquired by them, they knew who we were, they knew we had a strong team, and the partnership couldn't work out, financially it didn't make sense for both parties, but we were already like 1 foot in the door. And then obviously it ended up making more sense to get acquired, and once they got money from Rakuten, it all just, worked out well. But I definitely think building that relationship, I think the beauty of the tech world is you can go up to anyone and talk to anyone, right? Like, it doesn't matter if you're a huge VC, a huge founder, everyone is always giving advice and everyone is always talking. So going to events, I don't put myself out there. I don't just go up to people and talk to them. It's something I'm always still nervous to do this day. But, what I realize in the tech world is everyone's an open book. Everyone will talk to you. Everyone is willing to help. So getting to do that early on in your startup career and in your startup life is very important, because it'll open up doors and open up partnerships, which I think a lot of times end up leading to acquisitions.
It's interesting. We had a similar experience at my last company, but we were a little bit more intentional. We actually started having very deliberate partnership and M&A conversations with folks, and then something completely serendipitous like what you described came out of that. You wanted to add something?
No, I was just going to say, if you're a small startup and it's early in your startup's life, it really needs to happen organically. I think when you're larger and you have metrics and you have lots of potential buyers, maybe you've ignored a couple of potential suitors in the past because you wanted to build a business bigger. It becomes a whole different ball game than it is when you're smaller and you start with a partnership type relationship. You certainly want it to happen organically. You don't want to go to them and say, "Will you buy me?" That is not the approach. It's just build that relationship, show how your startup will add value to what they're doing, and things tend to work out naturally.
So once you go down that path of partnership to acquisition conversations and you start, putting a few things on the table and the conversation all of a sudden becomes a lot more real, what are the terms that matter? What are the important things or mistakes to avoid when you're negotiating your exit? And I know you mentioned the first thing for you, which was the team. You guys want to share? Do you want to start because you're an investor?
So through my experience, we were talking to a number of companies about our acquisition, and the ways that people structured it, they were kind of different. So some people wanted to pay more money up front. Some people wanted to do more on an earnout. Some wanted to negotiate salaries. And I think someone gave me this advice, like you need to think about 3 things when you're selling your company as a founder. You need to think about your investors, yourself, and your team, and you need to decide which order you care about. And so for me, after thinking about it a lot and talking to my co-founders, we decided we had like a 9-person team, and we realized that what we cared about most was the team. And so we were talking to a lot of companies on the East Coast and some out on the West Coast. And when we could have made more money selling to the companies on the East Coast, but what we realized is that none of our teammates were actually going to move out. It was going to disrupt their lives in that way. It wasn't going to be companies that people would recognize on their resume, whereas the West Coast companies, people would. And so what we did is just tried to optimize for our team, and we fought really hard for every dollar of salary and every stock option that we could get for our teammates. And that's something that I was really proud of through that process.
Is that thought process to put the team first, which sometimes can conflict with, investors and board members, is that coming from discussions with the acquirer? Like, how do you negotiate that throughout the process? Or did you have any conflict when you were negotiating that?
Well, I think for us on the Slice acquisition, we were on the same page right away, right? But I think as like a founder, it's like your team is everything, right? They're the ones that believed in you right away when you had this vision and everyone thought you were crazy. So they come first. And I think we were very passionate about that early on. Because if they're not happy, then how are you gonna live with yourself if doing something just for you or just your investor? Right? It's like they're the ones that bet on you early on. And I think to see it through, right, of like where it is now, that everyone that was on the team post-acquisition is still here, lets us, be happy. For me, one of the most important things in an acquisition that you have to think about is how are you going to set your company up, the company that's acquiring you, to be happy once you're gone, right? No entrepreneur is going to be there forever. So you want to have the track record of, we sold Unwomi to Slice. We went from 1 million users to hopefully 10 million users. It was a great, successful exit all around. So now the next startup we build, right, and we go to get acquired again, they know that, right? So it's like very important to set yourself up that that what you guys or what your team is going to be doing within the company is going to be successful.
I'll talk about a different aspect of it. Once you're acquired and the integration goes on, really understand what everybody's motivations are. Because it turns out I walked into a situation where there was an executive at the acquiring company who thought that I would be part of his P&L and he would basically run my company. And it turns out I became his counterpart and I had to work closely with him to integrate my company into the acquiring company. And unfortunately, he put up a lot of roadblocks because he wanted me to fail with the integration so that he could come in and say, see, these guys belong under my P&L. And I didn't know that going in. So I wasn't accustomed to sort of those internal corporate politics. So it's real important to really if you're a founder, to understand that that kind of stuff can happen post-acquisition. So, don't necessarily envision yourself becoming the CEO of the company that acquired you, because there's a whole lot more you got to go through after the acquisition. So, that's kind of a negative story, but it can't all be positive and rosy, because this is startup land.
I'm saying you're right. Like, it's like you go from controlling every part of the situation to having to step back, and now you have this whole other company on top of you, and it's not
That's
easy.
right. And politics and everything else plays in. When you're a startup founder, you're typically above the politics because, the buck stops with you most of the time.
Okay. One last question for you guys. 99% of startups get acquired for an amount that's under $100 million. How does that factor into fundraising strategy and raising your different rounds?
I'll be really quick. Yeah, I see so many entrepreneurs today get so excited when they raise a big venture round, as if that was an exit. That is, yes, you want to celebrate it internally because it gives your company the fuel, but every venture round you raise increases the hurdle in terms of what that exit needs to look like, particularly when it's a price round and a VC basically puts a clause in it that says you can't sell unless they agree that you're going to sell. So that's the reason why, oftentimes a lot of startups that raise a ton of money don't get to a successful exit because, as you mentioned, there's so many more exits below that 100 million threshold. So every time you raise a round, you should, as a founder, do a net present value analysis, right? Understand exactly how much post that raise your company has to be sold for in order for you to have a positive outcome. Because you may be getting acquisition offers that might be in the $50 million ballpark, and you have taken, you haven't raised a ton of money. You got to think really, really hard, particularly if you haven't sold a company before, whether or not you want to go for that first win, versus taking a $10 million funding round, which means that you have to be well north of $100 million before an exit makes sense, not only for you but for your investors.
Yeah, and it considerably reduces the number of companies that can afford to buy you, right?
That's right.
If I read between the lines a little bit on your story, your buyer would have wanted to buy you before, but they just didn't, necessarily have the money.
Yeah, and I think if we raised a big round, we wouldn't have sold, right? I think that would have ended up screwing us over, right? Because then VCs want to see a certain exit, a certain return on their investment, and it limits you, right? And now it's like the cool thing in startup world to raise as much money as possible, but a lot of times that limits you, right? Because if you're a founder, you have a $50 million exit, you and your team are very happy, right? And that can set you up for the future. But if you go and you raise $5, $10, $15 million, and you have that valuation on you right now, your VCs want to see a huge return, and I'm sure you know that.
and not only that, but the outcome for founders and team members is also less and less attractive.
Yes.
Do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, very quickly. I think we always advocate people raise as little money as they absolutely need to get to the next step. And really, in that question, we're asking people kind of how well have they planned? Like, how well have they thought through what the various steps are to get from step 1 to step 10 to building their company? It's really simple. If you're going to if you end up selling your company for $10 million, it's better that you raise $500K and not $3 million, right? And I think when we see founders, even at the seed stage, saying they're raising $2 or $3 million, we really question why they need that much money and what exactly they're going to be doing with it. And I think it's really important for all founders to think about why they're raising that much money.
Any final advice or a book or a newsletter that you think could be helpful for people who want to learn more about that topic?
So I'm all about the team. So there's a book, I don't know, I forgot who it's by, but it's called Who, and it's a lot about the hiring process, which I think is awesome. I think the main thing here, though, is just do what you love. Right? It's like I love to go, from the day I started on Roll Me, I love to go to work every single day. Right? And I'm still, it's I don't even know how many years later, and I still love going to work every single day. That's the main thing. And I know that, seems kind of obvious, but if you don't love what you do, in the startup world, when things go bad, it's going to be very hard to go back up because it's a roller coaster ride. So as long as you love what you're doing, you'll be happy and things will work out.
I would just say that, startups are hard. So as you mentioned, I'll echo that, do what you love. And if you're building a startup and it's not in the consumer space, it's in enterprise space or SMB SaaS space, go and sell your product before it's built. Focus on the design, the front end, sell it, get some customers before it's built, because it will set the tone for your company's culture, right? Because if you're thinking that I need to raise money before it's built, then it changes the dynamic. The cheapest funding is sales, right? So if you start off there, then you're going to be in a position to win long term. So my advice is to sell your product before it's built, get some customers, and everything else will then take care of itself.
Yeah, I agree with that. The one newsletter that I really like is the CEO Challenge, which talks a lot about structuring revenues and getting a lot of revenue strategies in. And then around exits, I look at Mattermark a lot. I think they're good. What about you?
I mean, the number one thing that I'd say is I think everyone thinks about money, but when it comes to this, don't think about money first. Think about building something of value, thinking something that customers and users really want to use. And I think if you do that and you're successful, that's how you're going to get to a successful exit.
Thank you, everyone.